Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. In this video, we're going to debunk the atheists regarding poor design and bad design within the actual creation itself. As you know, when creationists debate atheists, we like to give them intelligent design arguments. Design in the human body, for example, the ear and how the ear actually works. And I'll put a hyperlink below this video. You can see the actual mechanics in the earlobes. As you can see in this actual image, it's just fantastic. As you can see, all the mechanics and how it actually works. It's just fantastic. It's like a machine speaker system built within the human ear. And I'll put the rest of the design arguments. You can see all the design intelligence within the creation, all the mechanics within the design. And of course, an atheist tries to smear this, with a shot. He takes a shot at it, and it's pretty obvious what they do. They basically ignore all this design in the human body. And as you know, scientists are spending billions and billions of dollars, using government resources to actually create and engineer human body parts, because these things aren't easy. You need to go to school. It requires lots of education. You need to be a professor and get their guidelines on how to do these things. These things don't just happen by themselves miraculously, as the atheists believe. The atheists believe, over millions of years, evolution and Mother Nature that never went to school basically just created these things over millions of years. Yet when we ask the atheists, well, can you show us a replication of that in your science lab? I like to see how these things actually create themselves through the natural impacts of the environment. And you tell the atheists to bring those small elements, the early elements, and create things like your hearts, your livers, your ears, your kidneys, your limbs, and all these things. And the evolutionists say, it takes millions of years. If we rely on evolution, the environment takes millions of years. Well, exactly. You say it takes millions of years because you can't actually prove it, right? Because if it takes a million years, you can't actually see it happen in front of your eyes. You can't be observed through practical analysis. So the atheists will say, it takes millions of years. Well, why do you say it happens that way and you can't actually demonstrate it in a practical science lab? So the next best argument the atheists can give is something like this. And it comes from Michael Dixon, who writes, "You clearly fail to grasp the concept you attempt to criticize. Evolution doesn't create life. Life existed before evolution took hold. Evolution explains how we go from single-cell organisms." Well, we already know that because it's a process through abiogenesis. And then he goes on to say, this is what he says, Michael quotes, "That doesn't prove a design at all. Evolution accounts for it perfectly. In fact, evolution actually is a much more succinct explanation for why we are as we are, because we would expect imperfections to rise." So he speaks about imperfections. So notice his argument. "That is also exactly what we find, which is why some people are born deaf, blind, mute, dumb, or even stupid. Scientologists, it explains why our adrenal glands are too big and why we get cancers." So this is a really bad straw man argument. And you go to all the evolutionist papers and you see this is what they say. They criticize the whole of the design process by looking at flaws and imperfections. Now, does looking at flaws and imperfections actually prove that there is no designer? No, it doesn't. You could go to Samsung, buy a Samsung TV. The Samsung production factory, it produces millions of TVs for the global population, for the consumers. Now, if a bad product comes out and there's a faulty part within that product, do you dismiss the whole company and say there's no designer? No, you wouldn't say that, would you? You would say there's a faulty part, but you would not dismiss that the product has no designer. So this argument to say there's a defect in the human body, it does not prove that there's no designer. And you notice here, it's interesting because they're quick to blame God and say, oh, look, God designs things in bad ways. There's a defect, so that therefore God is imperfect in his creation. But notice the deception here. The deception here is because it's faulty, we automatically blame God. No, you don't blame God straight away. There's an argument to counter that. First of all, scientists tell us, and medical researchers tell us, that there are environmental impacts that also affect the human body. We know that DNA can get damaged and so forth. And how do these environmental impacts affect? Well, it could be depleted uranium, for example. These chemicals, it could be something that we eat from the ground, the chemicals that we eat from the ground, the pesticides in our foods. It could be other environmental impacts and radiations that could cause birth defects and some of these things to actually arise. So to actually point the finger at God and say, oh, there's a problem here, therefore the problem is God and that's why that's bad design, that is a complete wrong fallacy. Other environmental impacts could be blamed for. In fact, human beings are disastrous. They create a lot of our world problems and our pollutions. So instead of blaming the human beings, they automatically blame God. They play the blame shifting game. So that in itself is not an argument. The second point of contention is that he says, that is also exactly what we find. He says that some people are born deaf, blind, mute, dumb, and stupid, and so forth. But you see, the atheist misses a clear point here. Allah says in the Quran, for example, we have given them ears, we have made them see, we've given them hearing, we've given them hearts, breathing, and so forth. Little is the thanks that they give. So Allah gives these things so we can thank Allah, the creation, right? But there are certain individuals that don't thank Allah. So Allah could take those things away from them. So everything is a test. Nothing is supposed to remain perfect. Allah creates imperfection, but there are certain things He creates with deficiencies. And why does He do that? So He can remind you that there is one God and He is the creator and He is the most powerful. If everything around us was created perfectly, then we would last forever. The world is actually temporary. It's not supposed to last forever. It's supposed to break down. This is the way the human race was created, because Allah says there's another existence. So, see, atheists want, and some people want to go to heaven, right? Atheists, whatever. Everyone wants to go to heaven. If it exists, everyone wants to go there. But the problem is no one wants to die, right? So God creates mechanisms to actually not last forever. And this is why He says, it explains why our adrenal glands are too big and why we get cancer. Well, God created it that way so you can get cancer. Otherwise, how are you going to die? So Allah created certain things, imperfections in those things, so it doesn't last forever. But the argument should be this: on a general basis, is things perfect? Yes, it is. On general basis, things are perfect, and that's the way it is. However, He creates imperfections within the creation because it is not supposed to last forever. Now, the atheists may say, oh, well, some people don't even get a chance to use these things. Well, that's why everything is for a test. If Allah doesn't give you hearing, He tests you to see whether you're still going to be grateful, because everything is a test in life. For example, someone might lose a loved one in the process, right? And as you know, if a person loses a loved one, you see that if he's a religious person, he would say, Allah gave me this person, this great companion, and Allah took him away. Because everything belongs to Allah. But there are some people, when they lose a loved one, they start cursing God. So when they lose something, they start cursing God and saying, why did He take that away from me? If He does exist, why did He do that? There can't be a God. There are many people who actually disbelieve in God because of losing a loved one or because of losing a certain body part. But then there are those who, even if they lose it, they thank Allah because they understand that everything belongs to God. So on a general basis, this doesn't actually prove that Allah is faulty in creation. He actually determined it that way. I mean, I could give you another example. You know, to get the latest iPhone, or if you want to get the latest Samsung, usually the company gives you a particular phone, yeah? But in that phone, it puts certain limitations. If it wants, it could have given you a 2 million gigabyte hard drive. It could have invented one and put one in there. But what does it do? It gives you less than that. It gives you a 15 gigabyte. Now, if it has the capability of giving you a 2 million gigabyte hard drive, it would give you that, right? If it had the capability, it would. And if it did, it keeps it away. Why does he keep it away? Because he's trying to sell you a certain product. He basically doesn't want to give you the best right away. Otherwise, you'll have the best and it would not require you to go and buy another one for a very long time because it does everything that you want it to do and it's not going to slow down. So basically, God works in the same way. He's not going to give you the best of the best because at the end of the day, if he gives you the best of the best, you're going to live forever. And that's not the purpose of this world. The purpose is for you to die and to come back to him. And having deficiencies in your body actually reminds you of Allah. It does. It actually reminds you. It makes you depend upon God. It doesn't make you depend on yourself. You know, if you are created completely perfectly without any defects, or you're not going to endure any defects later in life, there are some people who say, I am God. Look at me. I have no imperfections. You know, I walk high and mighty. I'm not dependent on anyone. And I've seen people say that. But then when Allah takes their health away from them, you see them, how they submit to Allah saying, oh Allah, you know, I turned away from you. I'm dependent upon you. And you see that humility get striked in that human being. And of course, there are those who just go out and still arrogantly, even when those blessings are taken away from them, even then they still reject God. And there are those types of people too. And this is why on the day of judgment, they will be called. They will be called about all of the blessings that were given to them. You know, and some atheists would say, oh, look, we have natural catastrophes that take place. You know, what kind of a God is actually sending all of these natural catastrophes that are taking place? You know, what kind of God gives earthquakes and poverty and all of these things? But notice they blame God instead of blaming human beings who don't share the wealth and the provision throughout the vast universe, the earthly beings. And as you can see, we don't do that. And so we blame God instead. And of course, all of these natural catastrophes that take place, do they actually destroy the earth completely? No. Life still continues. The test still continues. If you want a place that there is no natural catastrophes, that is heaven. You can't expect this place to be perfect. If this place would be perfect, then there would be no need to go to the next life. There would be no hereafter. This place has been created for a temporary testing ground. So you can't expect this place to be perfect and have all the perfections. If you want all the perfections, then you need a place like heaven. And if you want to get there, then you must go through the imperfections, die and get to heaven. That's the way it works. That's why we have floods. That's why we have famines. That's why we have natural catastrophes. But notice, even when these natural catastrophes strike, it does not destroy the earth. This is why Allah says it will not be destroyed until the horn is sound. It only happens when Allah says it happens. And He actually promises that will happen, which is another true prophecy mentioned in the Quran and in the Hadith. In fact, scientists actually even say it is going to come to an end, which is another testification. So this argument, oh, babies are born in cancer, what kind of a God would give this child cancer at such an early age? So instead of blaming the environmental impacts, they blame God. And even when they do, we could still blame it on the test. It's part of the test, whether the mother is going to be grateful with this child and deal with the situation and the emotional impacts, or whether she's going to reject God. And if she does, then she's going to be held accountable for that. So everything is a test. So this is the argument standard of argument. Instead of looking at the argument from a general perspective, yes, most of it is all perfect and it is created greatly, they then pick on little defects. I think this in itself is a fallacy by not looking at it from a general scope. And just like I gave you the example of a factory, that just because there are defects that come out of Samsung factory, it doesn't disprove that there's a designer for Samsung. And that in itself defeats the atheist.